Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
My God, it's full of stars.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by my botanical partner in crime, Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I'm contemplating the coming ecological disaster.
Yes, already arrived, I think, in some cases, ecological disaster. Yes, we are talking ecology, botanics, and space travel. So we are going to be covering 1972's Silent Running, starring quickly Bruce Dern, Cliff Potts, Ron Rifkin, and Jess Vint. That's about it, really. Small cast. Story being a project that has been jettisoned into space and has been out of space for several years. I think it's almost a decade. Is instructed that it is time for the project to end. The project itself has been growing flora in space to respawn on Earth, but governments of the Earth have decided it is no longer worth doing, and so are going to destroy the plants and bring the astronauts back home. To this end, Bruce Dern's character, Freeman Lowell, decides that that is the wrong thing to do, and so tries to sort of rebel against and keep the plants in space. So Julian, initial thoughts then on Silent Running.
I like this film a lot. I was surprised how much I enjoyed this. It's obviously, as you say, like a very small cast, but it looks really good, especially for its era. It actually has ideas. It's very focused in a way like Gravity or Breaking Bad, where they do this kind of stuff where they show all of the details of how they work through a problem. It's very focused on that kind of thing, focused on how you solve issues. Yeah, so I was pleasantly pleased by it. How about you?
Yeah, I enjoyed bits of it. I agree with what you're saying. I watched a cleaned up version of it, and it looks really good. I mean, it cleaned up really well. Um, I think both of us as well are fans of practical special effects. I've got to say, like the model work on the spacecraft and stuff in this is fantastic. Like I could just sit and watch that on the screen, sort of rotating through space, for a period of time. So I think it looks really cool. It definitely has a message. I feel it's a little heavy-handed at times. Um, and I'm not gonna lie, it was good. I enjoyed most of it. I just found I actually struggled to engage with it at times. Um, or I don't know. It was good. I got what it was saying, but it wasn't sort of speaking to me in a way that I was able to go, "Oh yeah, I'm emotionally being taken along with this one." So um, maybe we'll find out why. But yeah, it's still good. It's interesting. Um,
I think
but
that's true. I mean, I think that's fair. Um, I think it is more heavy-handed compared to most films.
mm,
It's not as heavy-handed as, a lot of films have been.
no,
I don't think it's the worst in terms of being heavy-handed. Um, and I think that's kind of mitigated by the fact that Bruce Dern is a little crazy.
yeah,
Like it's like, yeah, no, he's right, but he's also a killer and, and all of this. So I don't think you're supposed to think everything he does is good. And I mean, it's an ecological message, but it's like Earth's doomed anyway, right? I mean, there's nothing that's gonna, bring forests back to Earth or something. So I guess I felt like, I would object more if he were a totally unproblematic hero, or
yes,
if somehow they were going to save the Earth, and this is, the kind of like Thanos thing, like we're saving the universe, we're saving the Earth, those kind of like artificial high stakes, bad characters, that
Hmm.
stuff I object to more than, look, we care about trees, and like it'd be nice if Earth has trees,
Yeah.
like that matters, and people really devalue them. Um, so I guess that maybe I'm less bothered by a heavy-handed message if I feel like the characters and the plot are reasonable.
No, I think it's fine. I think I like the fact it feels very 70s in the sense of, spoilers obviously, he fails pretty much.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it isn't like you say, there is no breakthrough at the end. They're not going to, they're not going to respawn the Earth, and it's going to, there is the ending of the film is that there is this small blue robot dottering around using a watering can to keep a forest alive as it sort of, floats through space and orbits the sun. So yeah, it runs at a pace, and it definitely has elements I like um in that respect of like being very 70s. I think like you say, the fact that like Bruce Dern's character Lowell is clearly not is unhinged by the end of the film, or even by maybe even the start of the film. Um,
Well, let me ask you a question about it being kind of like um too in your face, or okay, this film has a runtime of 89 minutes.
mm,
The most in your face things are the Joan Baez numbers. It's like where the movie stops to sing a very 1970s song about like how important it is to love plants. Okay,
yeah,
now look, I admit my bias. I'm mostly vegan, right? So, but if you cut those musical numbers with their heavy-handed message and brought the runtime down to like 75, 80 minutes, would you feel it was less heavy-handed and like the movie better?
no, because weirdly, the one thing I was going to say is I like the music. Um, I don't think I don't think the music's not the problem. Because I think the opening credits give you that tone and expectation. I mean, the opening credits is a slow crawl through um, the forest. It's sort of like it's going through plants. We see small animals. There's a snail. There's a rabbit or whatever. There's birds. So there's this sort of, and then you come across Bruce Dern swimming in the this river or this pool, and then you have him sat with a rabbit feeding a rabbit in his lap. Like it's all very folky and very hippie-ish. It's very sort of, back to earth and all that sort of stuff. So, but the pace of it and the music of the opening credits to me sets that tone, and I'm fine with that. I say I kind of like the music. Uh, so I've got a problem with that. It's actually the bits I find more kind of disengaging is um although Bruce Dern's character is becomes unhinged and stuff like, and I don't want those, as you said, there's artificial stakes, but there never feels like I don't sort of get emotionally invested in the plight of what is going on. Like I don't feel like Bruce Dern's gone on some sort of I don't know. I feel more, So basically, the film starts and he's sort of like, doing all this stuff, and then all of a sudden, Mario Kart comes flying through. He's got these three other engineers that live on the station or whatever this ship with him, and they've got these carts, which are brilliant, by the way. I love the carts. I think they're ace. Um, but they look like Mario Kart. There's a red one, a blue one, and a white one. I mean, it's red, white, and blue. Could you be any more heavy-handed as to what they represent? I mean, but I'm fine with that. They're racing around. That's all cool. When it's that, and you see him getting frustrated, and there's a whole thing, they have a message where he's eating like a cantaloupe, and they're sort of eating some synthetic rubbish. I like all that, and I feel his frustration. When they sort of go and they're planting the bombs and stuff, and it becomes sort of like narrower and narrower as the film goes on. I kind of lose. I have less and less interest because it's almost like not only did they inserted the songs, but they also realize, oh, we've got to fill out a feature length.
Hmm.
So scenes become longer and longer, and then they're like, oh, now we've got to introduce this thing about Dewey and his arm doesn't work, and then they've got to do this. It's like, yeah, but nothing feels like urgent. Like, oh, we've got to fix Dewey. Well, why? He's a robot. I don't have any attachment to them. They're cute because they waddle around, but that's it. Like, it sort of just feels perfunctory, sort of the second half of the film, where the first half felt like it was building to something that was a bit more interesting.
Yeah, I will admit that it does feel like it's padded. It does feel
Yeah.
like this is a 60-minute, special that's been extended to 90-minute length.
Mm.
Um, I know what you're saying about the stakes. I kind of like, sort of like, oh, well, this is what happens next. Here's some practical thing we're going to have to deal with, in terms of maintenance on these robots, with
Mm.
no assistance. There are elements of that that I like, but I also do have the sense that, you're describing of, sort of like, well, where do we go from here? What's next?
Mm.
And um, yeah, so I feel that. I mean, and I do think that as far as that opening and the sort of setup, the two complaints that I have, one is that they should dramatize the situation on Earth more.
Yes.
Um, because we're just on these stations, we don't all we know is it's very corporate, it's bureaucratic, but we don't really know how bad is that ecological catastrophe. Are there food riots? Are there water wars going on? Like how bad is it down there? And how would you survive? I mean, if
Hmm.
the farms are gone, like
Yeah. What's
there's
generating the oxygen? Like I was,
yeah.
yeah. Well, do you know what it made me think of as I was watching it? Because they have a radio discussions. They are connecting with Earth through on the radio because there's four guys on the spaceship. Three of them are determined, like there's a there's a big announcement coming, and all three of them are like, "Oh, we're going home. This is being shut down. Like we're going home," and they're happy about it. And Lyle's the only one who's going, "Well, that's insane. They wouldn't shut it down. We've been up here for almost a decade. Like, why would they shut this down? That makes no sense." Like, he's convinced that they are the saviors, that this is the right thing. Like, he loves his forest. But you're right. That conversation with Earth
Mhm.
never really articulates the problem. But what it made me think of was there's the Twilight Zone episode that we talked about, the Adam and Eve one,
Mm.
where the guy crash lands on the bountiful planet, and we have the communication back home where the guy's like, oh, things are getting bad. Like nuclear war's like almost here. And then you hear those radio communications get worse and worse until no one responds, and you're like, oh, it got bad. Like it's never fully explained, but the implications are quite heavy and full of dread. You're right. In this one, I don't know what the Earth looks like. I'm trying to sort of like picture it in my head. It's like, is it something like Blade Runner, where it's just this world of like
Mhm.
buildings? Has the whole world been sort of like concreted over? I don't know. Is there some? What's the ecological disaster doing? How are we surviving it underground? I don't know. Um, so yeah, I agree with that. That sort of becomes a bit of a problem.
Yeah, and I'm not saying you have to have shots on Earth, but like you're saying, they should describe it, especially as Bruce Dern is saying, like, I can't believe they'd scrap this. Right. Well, it's important. There are,
Mm,
it's stated there are no forests on Earth, right? But again, I'd like to have some sort of picture of how dire it is and why this project is so important, not just to him as a person, but to the planet, um, without it being, preachy, the trees are important kind of stuff. It doesn't really have that imagination to do that. It's not really interested. The other objection that I have has to do with those three other astronauts. Um, and I identify with Bruce Stern, right? I mean, I am a geeky book reading guy, and I grew up in American high school a couple decades later than this, but um, it was filled with a lot of jocks who were mind-bendingly stupid and exactly had these kinds of personalities who were like, "Yeah, we're going home. Let's blow up all the trees. Fuck it. Yeah, cool visual." Um, so I identify with that, but at the same time, I think, how did they choose these people as astronauts?
yeah,
Like NASA isn't known for its roughneck jock idiots.
yeah. They have no discernible skills as astronauts.
No,
Because
they're totally irresponsible,
yeah,
thoughtless
because
brutes.
no, because they go around in the carts, and I'm fine with that because I'm happy you could have that as like boredom setting in or something.
Yeah.
But when it actually comes to setting the charges, only one of them seems to know what they're doing. Because one guy's like,
Mhm.
"Do we use this?" And he's like, "Plug the thing in," and he's like, "Whoa, disconnect that." So yeah, they're not even good at the jobs they appear to have been sent up to do.
Yeah, they have
Um,
no interest in it. They have no interest in the garden. They have no interest in. They don't even engage him in the conversation. It's just
no,
like, yeah.
but I do like the fact that this, and I can see it that and this is where I'm intrigued by this film because of sort of the messages. It's an ecological film. The film is, I think the 70s or post 60s was, the first real sort of look at sort of, conservation and all this kind of stuff. Like we'd gone through the hippie movement and there was a wider now look at, oh, we're making a bit of a mess of things. So potentially this could go badly. So this film is very much sort of saying like, well, this could be it. We're traveling in space. This is the only place we can have trees and all this other stuff. And this is where the sort of the folky kind of films will start coming out. You get these sort of this coming out sort of the folk horror of the era, but there's lots of films like this. But what I find interesting is it almost well, it tells you that humans are the problem. Because Huey, you got the three astronauts in their red, white, and blue, which clearly representing very American, as you said, very jock, very sort of. But they're paralleled by the three robots, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, who are also red, white, and blue.
Hmm.
And there's this notion that actually these robots, which perform automated tasks, are actually more responsible and can be more caring for this than the humans. We've wrecked it. These robots are actually more caring, but it doesn't say anything to me. I get the point they're trying to make, but we understand that the robots, they're not like droids in Star Wars. Do you know what I mean? Like they don't have sentience, they don't have a personality. Like they're not doing it by choice. They are literally just following a program. They're shown to be drones doing a task. So it's like, okay, cool, but you're not telling me that there are better life forms to be looking after the planet. You're just telling me that we could program robots to do this better than us. But that's not, you know,
Yeah, I don't think the movie is really interested
yeah.
in that theme. And I did find myself, especially as he's repairing them, and one is lost, and
Mm,
then he damages another, and they don't always follow orders.
mm,
And as he's talking to them, like I know he's bored and he's going crazy, and you're right, he could totally just reprogram them, right? Slide in different circuit
yeah.
boards, and um, but there was a point where I thought, "Oh, are these sentient? Like, they're not always following orders. He's talking to them. They are expressing like sadness,
Mm,
concern for the other robot, And it's like, well, I'm not sure that the movie has an answer to whether they're sentient or not, or really, it's not really interested in that. That's just a thing that he does. That's a
yeah.
theme, but it's not really a theme. It's not really the focus of the movie. And so you're right. I mean, like there's a message there about how maybe the robots could do this better, but that's not really developed or been thought about in this film.
No, no. It took me on a bit of a journey because it took me to Wall-E, the Pixar
Mhm.
film, Wall-E. I was thinking like, oh, like whoever whoever created Wall-E clearly watched Silent Running. Like that film, I'd never thought of because I hadn't seen it before. This was like, oh, that's clearly a follow-on, or at least there's a tangential sort of relationship between the two. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Like you say, what is the theme then? If you say what is the main theme of this film, the one that really strikes you as being its sort of its big purpose, if there is one.
But that's a good question because I am moved by this movie. This movie does work for me. I think it's way ahead of its time.
Mm, mm,
It doesn't present a real depiction of what Earth is like, but it does say basically we've destroyed the environment. There aren't trees left, right?
yeah,
There's
yeah,
no forest left. we've destroyed the environment, and the other thing I love is the sort of like food synthesizers, the junk that they're eating, the thoughtlessness that they have about food. Um, you know, I look at what other people eat and I see this like processed stuff, these burger patties that are made out of, pink slime that comes from, 30 different animals that were factory farmed and tortured to death in, systems that the people eating them don't understand. That's putting nitrates in our, you know, rivers that are killing, massive fish dead zones in our rivers,
Mm,
and nobody's thinking about this. They're just thinking, I want that McDonald's hamburger.
yeah.
Oh, or those chicken nuggets, that don't look like what part of chicken is that? That's
Yeah.
not a food, right?
It
And
tastes
I
like
eat,
chicken, may never have actually seen or been a chicken.
yeah, and this is madness to me. I mean, this is utter insanity to me. I eat food that I know what it looks like, right? Like, and I love the joy of vegetables and sprouts and, you know, um, how good I feel afterwards. And I think we're part of, and I'm appalled by plastic packaging for God's sake, right? So like, I mean, I am totally down with this message, and I think it's amazing how um ahead of its time it is. I mean, we have gone so much further into the kind of plastic, artificial foods, the thoughtlessness of it, the disconnection from our food sources, the disconnection from, you know, from the environment. I mean, people like to take their kids to a park, but then they go eat, chicken nuggets out of a styrofoam tray and,
Then leave
think
it in the
nothing of
park.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, and they leave it in the park and then fill those trash cans every day, 3 times a day with styrofoam containers, and I think, "What the fuck are we doing?"
Yeah.
This is
That
utterly disconnected. Look, I like skyscrapers, I love technology, but this is utterly disconnected from a sustainable way of living that is actually good for people, healthy for our bodies and our brains, and I know I sound like a total hippie right now, but I mean, I think this is actually way ahead of its time.
that conversation, and I do agree that conversation that this is ahead of its time because that conversation he has um when they're eating.
Mhm.
And I think this is where I think watching this film in a cleaned up, I think it was, whether it's 2K or 4K, I don't know, but it looks amazing, really well cleaned up. That scene weirdly benefited from it because you can see the details. But the three of them are sat there and they're watching. It's basically like a bunch of like Play-Doh cubes sat on their plate, and he's eating this sort of this cantaloupe or this honeydew melon or whatever. And they're talking about it. You can clearly see like his legitimate frustration with these guys. He's sort of like he's baffled by them, like much like you, like he cannot wrap his head around this idea that you've got access to a spaceship full of fresh produce
Uh-huh.
and you're eating this pasty plastic crap that's on your plates. But they challenge him back and they're like, yeah, well, I don't see it. As you say, they're so far gone that they look at their food and say, well, I don't see a difference between what's on my plate and what you're eating. And I love the way it's produced, the way the film is, the scene is set up, because again, it looks literally cubes. They're not natural colors. There's a bright blue, a bright green, and a bright pink or something on the plate. Like they don't look natural. And they're saying, well, I don't see the difference. And he's sat there literally with a spoon eating out of this thing directly. And he says, well, um, what he says, I love the taste. I love the fact that I've worked for this. This is the result of something I've done. I know I've worked towards. I've earned this. And I love the taste. I love the texture. I love the fact, the smell. It all tells me that it's this natural thing. And it's, as you say, it's that connection to um the food source. And it's. I mean, this film gives a vegetarian message, or even possibly a vegan message, because it's all about botanicals and all about sort of like flora. At no point does that we've seen there are animals on this
Mhm.
thing, but at no point does he eat a rabbit or anything like that. Like he could do. But it's their faces as he's explaining it, and they are utterly confused.
yeah, I identify with this completely, and
Yeah,
I
and
have so many
they're going like, what are you
conversations with
talking about?
people.
And
Or like,
it's such a good scene.
yeah, and I have conversations like this with people who are my friends, and they're like, "Well, I like chicken nuggets." I'm like, right, but we didn't evolve eating chicken nuggets.
Yeah.
Have it once a month as a sort of decadent treat, is bad. But I mean, like, this should not be an everyday thing.
But
Like,
that's the point. But
you know.
Even Lowell is making that point. Like he's
Mhm.
not saying like don't eat that. I mean, I think he sort of acknowledges that there's a need sort of for certain things because he's using chemicals to keep the trees and stuff alive. But even he's saying like, well, you've got this, like it's there. Like, why are you not? This should be your go-to, not that's almost should be like a backup, like emergency reserves. Like if things go bad, 100%, we need those rations or whatever. But when you've got free fresh fruit and vegetables, like I don't understand it. Like so, it's a really interesting scene, as you say, ahead of its time. A decade before, really, we're going to get the truly sort of processed TV dinners, microwave meals,
Mm.
diet food. I put it in inverted commas, diet
Oh
food from
yeah.
like Weight Watchers and all those things. That's going to be hyper processed and hyper full of salt. This film's clearly predicting a lot of that.
Well, and I grew up on TV dinners and soda.
Yeah,
That was
yeah,
what I ate as a kid. And I thought if it was, I identify with that sort of like, uh 50s sort of movement where it was like if it's, you know, uh unnatural and the product of technology, it's automatically better, right?
yes.
Um, the TV dinner's better, than what the old people did, which was they ate fruit directly and stuff. Um, but I mean, I without getting too preachy, I mean, I identify greatly with that scene. I don't understand how you take, all of these vegetables, make shitty vegetables, grind them up, give them to animals that are living horrible lives, pump them full with antibiotics to keep them alive because they die
Yeah.
otherwise. How you're eating them, then you, at the end of their torturous life, having consumed all the vegetables that you could have eaten, then you kill them, grind them up into paste, that deprive that paste of all of its nutrients, so you have to inject it with chemicals to supply the vitamins that would have been supplied by eating the vegetables those animals ate, and then you serve it to people in a TV dinner on plastic, and
Yeah.
it's like, dude, just eat those vegetables at the beginning of this entire chain, and all of these steps produce waste, produce, poisoning the rivers, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I understand the point. I'm not. I know you're vegan. I'm not, and I still do eat probably more processed food than I really should. I'm not probably. I
Me
do,
too.
but I am of even of the meat variety. Like I do have an acknowledgement of like good meat. Do you know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
won't buy a cheap cut of meat 'cause for the same reason. Where I'm like, no, like I'm not. It's not religious in the sense of like well, I'm the sacrifice of the animal, but I am a kind of like no, it's got to be good, you know. Like for that same reason, like it's got to taste good. It's got to be of decent value. Like I can't. Um, yeah, I've had that where you're like, oh yeah, pork chops or like gammon or steak, and you go, oh, and it's really cheap, and you get it, and you're like, this was like eating, a piece of cardboard.
Cardboard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, because it's cheap and rubbish.
And why am I doing, like, it's not healthy. It's not good for the animal. It wasn't cheap, why am I doing this?
Yeah,
No, I'm with you. And I would have way less objection. Look, I'd feel bad for the rabbit, but I'd have way less objection if Bruce Dern was just like, you know what, I feel like a rabbit stew tonight. And he killed one of those rabbits, and it's like an organic rabbit. Like it lived a happy life. And he killed it and he ate the rabbit directly. It didn't
yeah,
come from a plant and it wasn't frozen for a month and like pumped filled with chemicals.
mm,
You know, yeah.
no,
So no, I mean I get it. I like this stuff. I mean, and I think we're way further along. Obviously, this is a sort of what if this goes on kind of movie, right? Um,
yes,
But yeah, we are a lot further along these tracks,
It's
than we
interesting.
were when this was made.
Oh no, I'm just going to pause. I need to go for a pee, so I'm going to pause for 1 minute before we get to the next point. All right.
Okay, I'll run to the bathroom too.
Okay, cool. Yeah, to continue the point, one of the things I'm just looking at is there was a thing called the Back to the Land movement, which I think sort of cropped up in different decades, and in the 60s and 70s, this seemed to be a bit of a thing. And it's just exactly as we're saying. It happened in the UK and in the US, but there's this idea of trying to sort of um, bring people back to the food source, get people back to the land, sort of to re-identify with farming and um, respect the land to an extent. And I think that sort of obviously I can feel that message is in this film. There's a definitely an element of respect. I mean, from the opening credits, going back to those opening credits, it's more than respect. It's almost I don't know, idolization. There's definite sort of like a joy to sort of it passing through all those things with the music, very folky music as well, like going back to
Yeah.
roots and that sort of thing. Um,
Yeah, the other thing is how stupid the humans are, right? Like, and that frustration that Bruce Stern's character feels in that discussion about food is, part of a larger frustration with the thoughtless lack of long-term strategizing that's part of this human government.
mm,
Um, that we see throughout the film, right? But that really is most distilled into the decision to blow up the domes.
yeah,
Presumably this is just taking too much money. It seems a little absurd to use nuclear weapons to blow up these domes, and like let the robots take care of them or something, trim down your man hours. But it seems a little drastic. But um, there are these stupid decisions made by our governments, to abandon things that we've already heavily invested in. I mean, Ronald Reagan, a few years after this, would take the uh, solar powered generators, the solar panels off the roof of the White House,
mm.
just to do it, just because, screw Carter and those, people who care about the environment. Why would you do that? I mean, Carter had this on the roof of the White House. Um, you know, there is this kind of like thoughtlessness, this kind of willful thoughtlessness of humanity that I'm always boggled by. This inability to think globally, to think strategically as a species, and that is equally maddening to, I mean, in some ways, obviously, that's a lot worse than just the dumb jocks going like, but I like my chicken nuggets,
Yeah,
like, okay, you're part of the problem, but the real problem is the powers that be give you chicken nuggets, like this probably shouldn't be a choice,
yeah.
or it's certainly not as cheap as it is. We can change those things through, taxes and subsidies and things like that. Um, but yeah, we're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to half-heartedly create a dome program and then blow it up,
Yeah, the blowing up thing I think is I mean it creates partly those stakes you were saying before. Um, but it doesn't. Um, but it seems pointless because they're in space, but they're not. It's not like, well, if we leave them behind, they're going to fall to Earth. They're literally just sort of. It almost seems like vandalism in the
Yes.
sense,
Yeah.
it's oh we leave them behind, but we can't leave them in any good order. We might as well just like as you said, the jocks just going, well, let's blow shit up. I've got some firecrackers, let's blow things up. Um, but the destruction of the domes, because you see them again. I want to highlight how good the model work is of the ships. Like I really enjoy that details of it. But as they're being jettisoned off and blown up, the fact that they were built with the ability to to insert a bomb into it in the first place seems odd, but logistically
Yes.
that's
Right.
simple. And
There's a tower, like
yeah, insert
insert
here,
atomic
twist.
bomb here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that
That's
seemed
a thing
odd.
you want in a garden.
Yeah,
Like the Garden of Eden had a little metal tower with insert atomic bomb here.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's an odd design choice, but fair enough. But um Lyle knows it's happening. He knows it's it's sort of what I'm trying to get from, there's a scene where he knows that the end is coming, and he is in his one of the last domes, and he is um repotting or replanting some sort of saplings or whatever. He's trying to put them in pots, so he's got them to take with him. That's the assumption I'm making. It's never really expressed, but he's there and he's digging them up and he's putting them in pots, ready to go with him, I suppose. Um, and then, but you hear the booms, like you see them, they're laying the charges. They set the charge, the thing gets jettisoned in space, explodes, and you see this light fill his forest. All fine, all good, but it never feels like a ticking clock
Mm-hmm.
because he's kind of still sort of like just faffing. Like it never feels like, oh my God, I've got to save these plants. I'm going to take these back to Earth. Like this is the thing to it. And then, because he eventually, then someone does come to put the bomb into the tower, into that dome, and he's stood there waiting for them. He's got his shovel there, and after a kind of clumsy fight, he kills him. He chokes him to death using the shovel. Um, and that's fine. I'm fine with all that, but it never feels like I don't ever feel like there's a moment where he stops trying to save the plants and says, "No, I'm not leaving. Like I'm going to save. No,
Yeah.
I'm not just going to save these I've unearthed. I'm going to save the whole thing." It never sort of feels. I don't know. There's no step change for me in his decision making. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that they don't want to dramatize it. They don't want to have him talking to himself and saying like, "Not going to let him do this," Um, and the end result is that it feels like he's a little crazy.
Mm,
It ends up feeling like a more spontaneous, kind of disorganized plan than perhaps it could be. I mean, I do like the scene with the shovel. I like that he is determined to save, at least this one dome. But as you say, like there is a basic kind of like mechanics of storytelling that kind of falls down here a little bit. There's no ticking clock. You don't know how many domes there are, how many are being destroyed, like what the timeline is. Like, I got to save this one. He's not running around. He's just kind of like, I thought he sort of had already decided, like, or maybe not decided, but he's kind of like thinking about, I've got to save this one. I don't know how I'm going to do it. And he winds up just sort of making a stand for that one and then deciding, well, I've got to destroy these other guys.
mm.
Um, and it seems a little impromptu, a little sort of, on the seat of his pants, kind of, which takes away. I mean, I think it's hard because he's got an ecological message, but he's not a terrorist, right? I mean, he's
Mm.
he's not happy about killing these guys. But I agree with you. There's a kind of like basic mechanics of like, how does this work? What's the timeline? You know, and there are, besides like, why are you blowing these up with atomics? I mean, it's like, oh, can't have them fall into Russia's hands. Like,
Yeah.
um,
Don't
I,
want anybody
you
else
know,
saving the planet. Oof. No, can't have that.
well, and let's be clear, like they're out around Saturn. Okay,
Mm.
like this is not the most economical way of creating domes. Not to mention, like, what is the cost of putting these materials into space, right? Like, this is not a very um logical scenario, right? Um, so yeah, I mean, I think you just kind of have to go along with that or not. I mean,
Yeah.
it's then that's a mistake in so many movies, right? We're just like, why are you doing this in space? What is the cost of getting all this material into orbit? You know? Um, yeah,
Could they not have just built those biodomes on Earth?
yeah, I mean, but I'm kind of willing to go along with it. I mean, I
Mm.
think, there have been, I mean, the geodesic dome was, Bucky Fuller's big, idea about, creating a more efficient, economical way of living. Obviously that's an Epcot Center, those
Yeah.
ideas are
Yeah.
mirrored. There was the Biosphere Project, which everyone made fun of, but actually was some good science, and its heart was in the right place, even if there were some corrupt people attached to it.
We had the Eden
Which
Project over here, did similar thing.
Yeah, and actually, this dome was partially based on the one at the St. Louis Botanical Gardens, which
Mm,
I've been to, and which is, remarkable. Has multiple levels of,
yeah,
sloping landscapes with, ecosystems and stuff. And it's really a beautiful place. And I think these are noble experiments, even if the underlying logic of let's build it in space, and when we don't like it, let's then blow
blow
up
it
this
up.
vast. I mean, the cost to transport a pound of material into
Yeah.
space is pretty high. What did all the soil cost? Um, and then to blow that up, yeah, it doesn't make sense. And I agree with you that even just the drama of how many are blown up,
Yeah.
what's the time clock? Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. I mean, it's still fine. I'm still okay with it. I mean, um, I think there are some further interesting choices as it goes because as you say, he kills this guy with a shovel, chokes him with a shovel. He leaves the body there, runs off, and then a part of what he does is hit the other two astronauts um are on one of the domes. They're setting the bombs, but they're all sort of clasped onto this central sort of body of this spacecraft or this space station, and he jettisons the dome off with them in it, and it explodes and it kills them. Um, and again, fine, like you say, it's kind of reactionary, but I don't mind that so much because I'm sort of like well, I've killed one, I've kind of got to do the other thing, and this seems like the quickest way of doing it. So he sort of sacrifices one of the domes to do it. The bit I do find interesting though is how he then deals with what he's done because he gets injured in the process of all this as well. Like he sort of falls, and the robots bring him like resuscitate him and fix up his leg and all this other stuff, bring him back. But then he sits and sort of whilst he's recuperating, he sends the robots out to dig the grave. Well, and more importantly, he digs a grave
Yeah.
and then he has the robots put the body in it and to cover it up. So, and I was like, well, can you just sort of jettison that into space? Would that not be easier? Or are you actually, is this a thing of, oh, nutrients for the earth? Like,
Yeah.
again, but it's the fact he got the robots to do it. Like, he seems like he can't face the fact he killed
Yeah.
people.
I think that's true. I think it's partly wanting to give a proper burial to this guy
Yeah.
he feels bad about killing, and also, you know, uh, let it nourish the planet, right? I mean, um, I'm actually more okay with that than I am the rings that he's got to pass through. So having killed the fellow astronauts, and he is messed up by it, and there is this bit of he has to reprogram one of the robots to come to do surgery, which isn't the best, but okay, at least it's following through on complications, and
Mm-hmm.
at least he's not suddenly a martial artist who doesn't get injured and is
Yeah, he's not
as we
holding like a
see.
tourniquet on his leg whilst he does surgery on himself. So, yes.
Right. So many of these movies, people suddenly have great combat prowess and they heal
Yeah.
magically. And so, okay, it's not the best, but it is at least doing that. Um, I'm more bothered by then he has to escape like the rest of the fleet. And so he puts in the trajectory to just kind of blast away from them. And they're like, well, you're heading through Saturn's rings, which obviously this is the 70s. We don't know that much about Saturn's rings, and
Hmm.
it's depicted as like a nebula in Star Trek or something,
Yes.
right? I'm willing to forgive that. It's hokey and
Yeah.
doesn't hold up well, but okay. Um, that's fine. That doesn't, you can't really ding it because it's the 70s, right? But why did he set that course? Right? I mean, like that bothers me more. Like, and that is the clearest indication. Like, if you're gonna commit a mutiny and kill the rest of your crew, maybe plan a couple steps in advance, right?
Yeah. But this comes to 2 points because you're right. I've no idea what. Well, not only is it not ill, it's ill thought out in the sense of it. You're not really sure what he's going to be doing. But then the repercussions of this is as they're out, the one forest, I believe it's the one forest they've got left, starts to die. Like the plants are withering. Crops are sort of not fruiting, that sort of thing. And he then spends this weird like montage being like, I don't know what's wrong. And he's looking at all these sort of like desolate pictures of like desolate forests on Earth and all this other stuff. He's like, I don't know how to fix it. And I'm the same as sort of going, you're heading the wrong way. But
Hmm.
even before he says it, because he figures out it's the sun. And I was going like, well,
Yeah.
yes, yes, you're heading away from the sun towards the really cold planets. Like they all need a certain amount of sunlight and nutrients and stuff. Like I was really like, how is this a surprise? Like he's appearing as incompetent as the other astronauts all of a sudden.
Yeah, well, at least he's trying to solve it,
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, but and I get that the message is like, okay, I mean, logically, these plants evolved on Earth. They're used to a certain amount of sunlight. You take them out of that situation. But you're a botanist, an
Yeah,
astrobotanist,
yeah.
like you're certainly aware of how, chlorophyll works.
That should be
Um,
point number one, really, shouldn't it?
yeah, yeah. I mean, but also you're out at Saturn anyway. The difference in light, let's say that you get further out, right? Um, he's not at Uranus. Let's say that he gets further out. We don't know how further out he is, but he's certainly not out of the solar system.
Mm.
I mean, he hasn't traveled that far in his escape attempt because he can't still be rescued. Um, the difference of sunlight between his new position and his old position at Saturn
Is
is
marginal.
minimal.
Yes.
Right, compared to the lack of sunlight that you get out at Saturn. Why have
Yeah.
you built this out at Saturn? I don't understand that. And surely you'd already be aware of that, right? You'd already have artificial sunlight generators
He
if you're
does.
building
No, he
a
does.
biosphere out at Saturn.
They are
Right.
shown in the opening of the film. There's a bit where he sat and he looks up and there's this big cluster of lights. And I was like, oh, I'm assuming that's an artificial light source to, make up for the lack of sunlight.
Right.
When it said happening, he's like, it's the sun. I was like, well, I'm assuming that's the point you were going to make. But I did go back to the, I'm like, but you had artificial light functions in all of your domes. So
Yeah.
yeah, it really doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. I mean, it's almost like, why are the plants dying? Oh, it's because I haven't been watering them.
Yeah,
Well, you've been watering them all the time. Also, you're a botanist. It's like you
yeah,
maybe should know this. Um, this shouldn't be the end result of a montage where, but look, we both know what this is. This is to give him something to do
yes,
and to draw and to give some drama to that third act besides what am I going to do when the humans come?
yeah. But this is the bit that I said I become less engaged. This is the point where I become less engaged because, for exactly as you've said, for the vast majority of the film, like he seemed competent if slightly unhinged. But then to become unhinged and incompetent, I was just like, oh, okay. This, as you said, this feels like padding. Like, oh, we've got to have something that feels climactic to resolve before we sort of end it, and it feels very tacked on to everything else that's already happened. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I agree. The one thing I'd say in its defense is that he is depicted kind of going mad a little, and I like his loneliness.
mm,
I like that he has trash everywhere. He started eating the processed food too, right? Presumably because it's easy, and he likes it. I like, and he like accepts the criticism of the robots, for him doing it. Um, but he's sort of become a slob who's gone a little crazy too.
yeah.
So I don't think that the movie is trying to use that as a justification for why he doesn't think about the sunlight thing, but I do think it's just padding,
It could be
but and
taken
to give some
in that
drama.
way.
But I do like him kind of going a little mad and eating the processed food and feeling like he's kind of fallen from his own ideals.
Yeah. No, I like that. Yeah. I mean, he's in a different state to how he was at the beginning of the film, so at least he has that um going for it. But the film ends again. Obviously, he's fixed one of them, like the red one. I think it's Dewey. Um, I forget now, but you said about you're not entirely sure whether these are sentient or not because he has this conversation. He is rescued, um, and the white one's already gone, been blasted off into one of the other domes, and the other one's got this broken arm and sort of like so it can't do the job it's needed to do. So he's like, well, I've got to take it with me, and so they're going to leave this lone robot in space in this thing. They sort of jettison off the dome. They don't blow it up, but it's just going to be floating through space to be sustained or whatever by this robot.
By Dewey, yeah.
Dewey, yeah, and he's then going to go back to Earth. I'm like, cool. And I'm like, all I can think is, I'm not sure whether this is supposed to be sad. Oh, I'm supposed to feel for this, uh, you know, robot that's going to be left isolated in space because there's been the indication that they have some form of emotion or at least an attachment, or is it now that this is a victorious? It's not kind of fist pumping, but is it victorious because he saved one of the domes and it'll float off in space? And but I'm like, yeah, but you're not guaranteeing its future. Um, so I don't know what that's about. Or is it supposed to be tragic because he couldn't do what he wanted to do and he's been taken home to a plantless Earth?
I see. I like this. I think it's sort of like it's what he can do.
Mm,
He knows that if the humans come, they're going to destroy the dome, right?
yes.
He's killed 3 members of the crew. He's, I
Yeah.
mean, again, stupidly flown through the rings of Saturn, which actually endanger the last dome that you've tried
Mm,
to save for no reason. But everything he's done has been, if it's been about anything, it's been about saving that dome. Maybe it was impulsive defiance, but at the end, the one thing he has to show for it is that dome. So the humans are going to destroy that dome. Might as well give it the best chance of survival and the best chance of my objection is why does he not leave Huey, a long ways? Like Huey's damaged, he's not going to be enough work. But you've already shown he can do some stuff. He's,
yeah.
and at least he'll keep Dewey company, right? Like, Dewey clearly, is standing at his side, worried about him,
Mm,
um, like a lover or something. So yeah, I'm bothered why he doesn't just leave Dewey on the thing too. But I think it's kind of like it's what he can do. It obviously, radiation, debris, dust, what micrometeorites, whatever. I mean, there was a host of problems for this, but at least it's got a shot, which is better than beforehand.
yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, aliens are going to come to this solar system and they're going to find like a ruined planet Earth with, little evidence that there once was a civilization here, but they're all dead. And there's a dome with a forest in
Mm,
some condition, floating out past Saturn,
yeah.
with a non-functioning robot that used to take care of it or something. And that's interesting. I mean, I like that idea. It's sort of it's whimsical, but
Mm,
in a sad way that speaks to me. Like this is the ultimate. Forget our monuments, right? That aren't really going to survive. The Golden Gate Bridge is not going to be found by aliens.
yeah.
They'll find that dome.
Yeah. Yeah. Please return to is stamped on the bottom of it. Yeah. I mean, I think,
Alpha Centauri will have its own little dome of
yeah.
like these are the plants we salvaged from that dome. We know very little about this human civilization, but here are the
Yeah.
things they ate.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, but full of crops, small animals. Um, yeah, one of the things
That'd be good though, right? That'd be a good,
would be an
like
interesting
that's
short
looking like
story.
it'd be like really utopian.
Yeah, yeah. But I'd almost want to see it from the other point of view, like a short story from written from the perspective of an alien race that sort of like enters our solar system and finds this dome floating in space, and then sort of gets to Earth, and they're like, we have no idea how this happened, but like and as we floated through, we found the remains of other domes that had been destroyed or whatever.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. It would be interesting to sort of to pick up on that. Um, One of the things that's interesting about all the um we haven't gone that far yet. We're sort of the apocalypses that we've been dealing with. Like the reason for the apocalypse obviously is not addressed or stated in this film. It could be that there's been a nuclear winter, it could be all kinds of different things. Like it could be natural disaster, over farming, over producing, that sort of thing. We don't know. Um but this is the first one that really hasn't given us that sort of thing to be like, oh man, this was a complete, cock up on man's part. Like even the Mad Max film, sort of like, although it's a drawn out lore, are like, oh, an oil war, and then the bombs dropped, and then there was this, and that's why it's in this position. Humanity has been pushed to this position. Um, and all the same with others, the on the beach and all those. It's always been we did this to ourselves. Um, it would be interesting if even to throw this out and be like, there was an ecological disaster, like a bit like Interstellar, where like
Hmm.
there were crop disaster after disaster after disaster, and so the decision was take it off Earth to the planet is sort of fighting back, so we've taken these off Earth in order to sort of try and save what we could, and it wasn't man-made. Would be interesting, but like we don't get enough information to establish what it was that's caused the problems.
Yeah, I thought about Interstellar too, and we how often complained about what's not shown. And I think, Interstellar has, had a lot of complaints of like, well, it doesn't do a good job of portraying why this is the case on
Mm,
Earth, what it's like in other areas of Earth besides where the main character is. Um, and so I think I'm okay with just kind of gesturing in this
hmm
direction. I think both of us want a little more gesturing here for sort of like what life is like on Earth. It could just be obviously there's been some kind of ecological collapse, whether caused by global war or climate change, or we don't know. I don't know that I need a cause, but I
mm.
need at least some kind of description for, you know, just some references to, oxygen generators, that are keeping things going without the trees
Yeah.
and,
Well, it's this.
after the ecological collapse.
Yeah. The reason I want it is because of a line, because of this position that Bruce Dern's Lowell takes. So when they are waiting on the announcement that's going to come from Earth early in the film, the three astronauts are like, no, this is being shut down. We're being taken home. This is all going to get blown up. Like they have the right decision. They sort of it's sort of they've gone, oh no, well of course that's what the answer is going to be. We're looking forward to going home. His position is, well, they've been doing this. Well, I think 7 or 8 years. He says they've been up there for. Then they wouldn't let it die now. That'd be ridiculous. I almost need just like say a drop line or a couple of lines there that says this project was started because.
Yeah,
Because as you said, like the amount of money that must have been pumped into this, like why has it been deemed as a failure? Because they say that they've tried to spawn flora on the planet before and it has failed.
right.
And so again, it's okay. So have they done a further experiment and they've now written it off and said this is a folly. This is no longer we can't keep wasting money on this because we know it's not going to work. Like I'm curious, I just want that little bracket there could be really where you pad out the position on Earth, why this was started, why it's being shut down, and then just give us that um information just to help a little bit.
I think what confuses me is that things seem relatively stable on Earth. So,
Yeah.
like, I don't know that it seems like it's a logical decision to those three astronauts. I think they're just happy to go back to Earth,
hmm
right? But the fact that they're happy to go back, presumably maybe loved ones, family, whatever, presumably them being happy to go back means it's not a horror show. It's not The
Yeah.
Walking Dead on Earth, right? And there's a government in place, et cetera, et cetera. They still have people are still listening to authority, right? So
hmm
obviously, it's not the worst thing possible. It might not be ideal, but I mean, I think it's kind of implied that there's been an ecological collapse on Earth. There's no trees, there's no fauna, um, and that they are able to live through these kinds of like replicators, sort of Star Trek
Yeah.
replicator things. And so even though there's no plants, you're able to generate this kind of like sludge nutrients, technologically. But a few lines in this direction would do wonders. And you know what I'm saying? I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's implied. I don't need that much more, but a little bit. I don't need to know the cause, but just a little bit about like what's it like on Earth, because it seems like it's pretty good, right? I mean, but it just might be totally artificial, right? Like they're living in domes and going to like plastic bowling alleys and eating sludge and thinking like life is good. And outside, it's kind of looks like the wasteland in Mad Max.
And that's kind of, and again, I don't need, as you've said, I don't need like a full montage of it. I don't need, a full breakdown of it. But it would be nice to just have that understanding that, oh, that's the position we're in. That this was started almost as a last ditch effort to save humanity, and this is now being written off. Because that would almost,
Yeah.
because I think that would add a layer to the sort of like, well, they're excited to go home and they've given up on this, and it sort of seems almost sad that there's no thought being given to it. So, yeah, it would be interesting to see
Well,
that. But
this is what's confusing to me is we both kind of read it like this, but I don't think that it's really about saving humanity. There are
mm,
no lines where they're like Bruce Dern never says like, why would they destroy this? This is the only chance to save humanity.
yeah,
I think it's not that. I think they actually have an okay, sustainable life on Earth just with these artificial foodstuffs. It's just that all these plants have died out. And so this isn't an attempt to save humanity. This is an attempt to keep these species alive, possibly, have some sort of, trees and, rabbits and stuff like that that can survive and maybe be transplanted to Earth, or this is a weird like multi-trillion dollar experiment to keep trees alive basically, and after an ecological collapse. But I don't know, it's weird, right? Because
yeah,
we think of it as saving the world, and it's not really Interstellar, right? It's Interstellar, but they have replicators basically, so it's not the
yes.
end of the world.
But and maybe that's where, like, you and I are experience, or our understanding is comes from a different kind of cinema language, because we're very used to it being the sort of like, that's the storyteller, that's the narrative hook, isn't it? It's like, this is the last ditch effort to save humanity. But also the thing we've talked about is, and it's sort of acknowledged, is the cost of doing this. Well, if it's not to save humanity, and it is literally just to regrow some trees, but everything else is sustainable, I can't buy into the fact that any government or organization would spend this much money on something. Do you know what I mean? I'm kind of with Bruce Dern, where I'm like, yeah, all right, it seems failed, but you'd find another way of doing this. Like, it doesn't seem, um, it doesn't seem difficult to for other people to travel to it. Let's say.
Right.
So there's a rescue mission. There's another ship coming that's going to take him away, or going to take the other. So it's not as if this is particularly hard. So blowing it up seems an odd one, when you could be like, well, actually, we're giving this up and we're going to give it to rich people.
Hmm.
This is now going to become the mega again, going to, not so much Interstellar, but if you've ever seen Elysium, um,
Hmm.
with Matt Damon, in the same thing, where there's like a big circular sort of satellite kind of space station, and all that's got trees, and the Earth is in a real mess. A
Hmm.
similar situation where they're like, yeah, we can't do this because we can't sort of spawn flora on Earth, but we've been successful to do it there, so we're giving it over to a housing development for rich people.
Yeah, that would
It's
make more sense,
yeah,
right? I mean, look, blowing them up with atomics does not make sense.
No.
It's not clear. Like, do they have a space elevator? Do they have some kind of way to minimize the cost of getting in all of this material into space? We don't have all of those answers. But I kind of feel like, it's sort of like I like the concept here.
Yes.
I feel like, it's a paradoxical situation where the more information you provide about Earth, the more we can kind of poke at it and say, okay, they have like, how bad is it? What caused this apocalypse? Now I want more information. Do you have space elevators? Is it really an apocalypse if you're living in, like fallout shelters with nice bowling alleys? I mean, I don't know. We know so little about this situation. But you're right. I mean, there are basic logical questions here of
Mm,
how did this come about? Um, I guess I'm just willing to forgive some of that because it's not what the movie's interested in, right? I mean,
no.
the movie is like there are these domes that are the last places that have trees and look like the old Earth, and yeah, it's really costly. This was a sort of indulgent program. A new administration doesn't want to keep paying the cost.
Yeah. I could. I mean, it's it. Having talked it through with you, I kind of like it more than I think I did when I first watched it. In a sense. However, I do feel there are, as you said, like narrative gaps that I'm just sort of like, well,
Oh
what
yeah.
about this? That's what. But in my head, I now almost have this film as a prequel to Wall-E. Like they were like, this endeavor doesn't work, and so, but we've got whatever there's the big corporation in Wall-E. Okay, but we're going to leave the planet and we're going to go live on these other on these planets on these big ships and have robots look after us and leave some robots behind to clean up Earth, and then we'll come back when it's ready, and try
Well, you
again.
you raise an interesting point with these comparisons, which is a way in which, and I can't believe I'm saying this is a hopelessly idealistic movie.
Mm,
Um, which is that it's the 70s, right? So they're predicting an ecological collapse and you know, artificial foods and all of this, right? What they don't predict is how corporate and rich focused the culture will become.
yeah.
So like this is the hopelessly idealistic the government, right, which just recently put a man on the moon, right, and is would be invested in this kind of idealistic project, and a new administration will and their corporate interests, right? You see, it's
The banners on
the
the ship and
airlines.
stuff, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a corporate element here, but this is not predicting just how corporate and rich focused
Yeah.
all of this will become. Um, that really hurts me to realize.
Well, that's what 50 years is, isn't it? That's the difference. Is yeah. Well, even 50 years, 10 years. I think you get to the 80s, and that's when it all sort of really sort of diverts into that. And we're now that generation that was sort of raised on that corporation or that corporate takeover of everything. Um,
Yeah, this is a product of the America that created the national park system
yeah,
and the Civil Rights Act and put men on the moon and did great things. And now we are the country that says, how can we make some money off this? How can we get Elon Musk involved? Can we really just have Elon Musk do it? You know?
yeah.
Um,
We'll sell him the park system. That's what we'll do. Or we'll turn it into a VR system. You just got to wear a helmet and you can go around and see all the parks on it, but without leaving your house. Um,
and then we can turn the parks into mines
yeah,
and
exactly.
just turn them into giant oil wells because you'll have your VR.
Yeah, fracking galore is what it'll be everywhere. Um, yeah, I don't know. It is interesting. You make a really good point of how this is a different cultural worldview of who is responsible or who will make those attempts to try and save the environment. And we now live in a world where we have all these sort of like, the Paris Accord and all these other bits and pieces where governments have come together and said, you're right, we're going to reduce down to zero emissions by 2030. And then they all leave and do barely anything about it. Um, Yeah, it's interesting.
Yes, exactly.
It's definitely an interesting view. I think, you couldn't make this film. No, well, you do make this film now. It is Wall-E, and it's all about corporate greed and how distracted and distant we came from um, you know, Earth and being connected with it. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, this rich guy wants to destroy one of those domes to create lumber. Well, without him, we wouldn't have the funding. So just let him do it.
That's an
That's
interesting
fine.
point. That's an interesting one about obviously they've got artificial materials and stuff. But you're right, and that's the thing. They blow this stuff up, which is a complete waste when you've got all this resource. That's totally like, whoa, hang on. Before we do that, could we bring back all the crops, the wood, the nutrient soil? Could we do something with that before we just blow it up like a bunch of kids? Yeah,
I did wonder about that. Like, could you evacuate the bunnies? Like,
yeah.
like
Oh no, they did not. No.
is that does that
Yeah,
seem hopelessly naive of me? Like you're
yeah. All
coming
those
back
little
to Earth
turtles.
anyway.
That's it. All those
Yeah.
little turtles in the
Oh,
creeks and everything. Like, yeah, they're gone. Like that was a bit. I was like, oh man, that's really harsh. Like, um,
yeah. I felt so too.
yeah.
Uh, yeah. No, you're right. I mean, it's just a great amount of resources you're detonating by nuclear blast for, I guess, your own amusement. I
Mm,
mean, I guess I do feel like some more lines about what's going on Earth. How bad has this catastrophe been? Um, why are you blowing it up? I mean, there are basic things like that um, that are, certainly annoying to me. But I do think, like, I love the message. I love the small cast. I
hmm
love these sets. I mean, even like the cargo bay looks great.
mm.
I mean, you know, um, there's I don't know why the ship has to be that big. It's one of those, sort of doesn't really make sense. But um, I mean, it's almost like a little ecological sci-fi play
Mm.
with, a cast of four people, three of whom are dead,
Yeah.
half an hour in or something. Um, that I kind of dig that.
No, it's an interesting film. It's definitely if it's a of its time, and I agree. Um, I do find it funny of how the distance between the domes on the ship and how big the ship is.
Mm.
But I'll come back to it. Those shots, there are shots repeatedly in this where it's sort of the camera's gliding past the model work that is this the exterior of the ship and stuff, and it's fantastic. I love all that kind of stuff. Those miniatures and this is the era of that kind of stuff, and it's fantastic. It really um just a tribute to sort of the guys that sort of put the effort into making those sort of those the detailing that went into those models just for those shots that last like a couple of seconds. So it is cool. Yeah, no, it's good. It's an interesting film. It's not the most hard hitting of the ones. I actually think from a we've had ones that have been kind of bombastic in their sort of like post-apocalyptic messaging of like we're all off into the wastelands to wear leather and ride sand dune buggies, or sort of almost hopeless ones like on the beach where it's sort of like we just got to sort of you accept your fate kind of thing. This one sort of rides that line, as you say, of sort of like, yeah, it's kind of post-apocalyptic, but we're kind of fine. This venture
Yeah.
didn't work, and there might be another version of this.
Well, I think what you're saying is this doesn't have the fun of the Mad Max movies. It doesn't
Mm,
have, the motor vehicles and the crazy costumes and the wrestler personalities and stuff that are so much fun. Um, but it also doesn't have this sort of like cold logic, brutal, message of an on the beach.
mm.
Um, it has this very different tone that is sort of decidedly not fun, but is much more in line with like 2001 or something like this. It's much more interested in, not that it's that good of a movie, but I mean, I think it's a good movie.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the better ones. But we have to discuss the actual ending
Mm.
because he does send Dewey off with the dome. as
Yes.
he's about to be rescued because he wants to save the dome from the humans who are undoubtedly just going to jettison it and blow it up. Um, and then he detonates, he uses the explosives to detonate his own craft
Yeah.
with Huey in it.
Yeah.
Um, which I'm not sure. Is that because he's guilty? I mean, okay, look, I dig the sad message, right? And I love the idea that it's like what I could do. My triumph is I saved the dome for however long I can, right?
Hmm.
But on the flip side, like, you could still go home, right?
Yeah.
Like you've got years left, and I mean, I guess he's worried they're going to find some evidence that he killed those three guys, although I think he could probably cover that up. Why not go home and say, like, for a while, I thought he was going to go home
Yeah.
and just, you know, be like, okay, look, I did my best. Now I get to go back to that artificial Earth and live the rest of my years kind of with this guilt.
I don't
And
think there's
knowing that
guilt.
like,
I honestly don't think there's guilt. I think that there may have been to an extent in the beginning. I think it's exactly what you just said. I think he, throughout this, and especially in the beginning of the film, we see a man that's so in tune with the um, the flora and the fauna that exist in these biodomes. He's swimming in the rivers. He's sat feeding the rabbits. He's eating directly from fruit trees and from the crops. He's eating fresh vegetables. Like, yes, he's gone a little mad, and we've seen he's given into like the synthetic sustenance and stuff, and he's raced around in the carts and he's done all that kind of stuff. I almost think it's a case of realizing where he's going, and I think it's suicide. The only way I can take it is like I can't go back. Like, to face up to whatever the Earth is compared to what I was. I can't face it. But the other point is, it it kind of he's taken the robot with him because he's like, well, I can't leave him behind because he's broken, and you're like, well, you've just blown him up. There is again,
yeah.
it's almost like there's a scene missing when he makes that decision. You know, um, I don't know. It's yeah,
Yeah, I don't know. We keep finding these moments in movies where people either commit suicide or they're set on their path in life and
mm,
then they can't adapt to, a new reality. And you and I will look at these characters and say, okay, so maybe you lost all your money or something, right? Like you could still do this, or you're stuck in this situation. You could still like write books and read stuff, and like you're gonna have a different life than you expected. But like, look, it's not going to be the Edenic life on Earth, but you could have 30 more years left to live on Earth and adapt to this weird thing and know, hey, I did my best for that dome. I hope that dome's still out there. It's very unlikely I'm ever going to put together a mission to go out and visit it, but
yeah,
I, you could have another chapter to your life, right?
yeah.
And oftentimes in fiction, characters just are unable to change. And maybe you're right. Maybe that's part of the point is he's just so tied to the system he can't go back. He doesn't want to live that kind of life. Um,
That's the only
but
thing
it
I
does
can.
seem a little arbitrary. Yeah.
No, but that's it. That's the thing. That's the only way I can. Um, that's the only way I can take it because it makes no sense otherwise. Because he's made active decisions to take the robot with him, the Huey or whatever it is, to take it with him. So it's like, okay, well, why have you done that to leave another one below to then make that decision? But there's a scene where you almost like the realization of going home should be, I can't face this nightmare and something. I don't know. Like you say, it's almost like it's they almost want something to finish the film off. But
Yeah. Yeah.
personally, I think the film should have ended with the dome just floating off into space. Like that should be the cut to credits kind of thing. But it sort of does, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Right.
Um,
It does
yeah,
after he's destroyed the ship,
yeah,
for no apparent reason.
yeah. No, I mean, this is one of those films that I think I can imagine the impact this would have had um, when it was released. people watching it, and it would have very much sort of, I think, spoken to that back to the land and self-sustaining kind of science fiction film that's not, you know, either pro technology or, whatever is going to, those kind of things. This is very much sort of like, yeah, we're going to take a science fiction story, but we are telling you that actually it's not even that science is bad. I mean, that's the one thing that's
Hmm.
interesting. There's no line that's sort of like, well, technology is bad. It's more a case of like, because it uses technology, uses the robot and its other things to do this, but it's very much but we shouldn't lose our connection to the land, like um, because the technology has allowed them to make these to save these things. So it's not anti-tech. It's very much, but don't forget where we came from. And I think that's a really interesting kind of position to take um, in a science fiction
Well,
film.
and I love that. I mean, I'm pro technology. I love technology. We're recording this on computers,
Yeah, yeah.
through the miracle of the internet. And I think that, so often we see these movies that are like religion versus science or
Mm,
science versus, whatever. And, we think, right, this is a false dichotomy in various
yeah.
ways. Here it doesn't have that problem, which I think is to its credit. And I think you see like the inheritor of the kind of like back to earth thing is like people living in urban landscapes with rooftop gardens
Mm,
and gardens on their lanais and this kind of thing, which is great, and community gardens, where you have not just poor people, but everybody getting fresh produce, sharing a space, I mean, there's been a lot of movement in that direction. And I think that, um, well, maybe it's too little too late for the planet, we shall see. Um, that is very much in line with this film, right?
yeah.
Wanting to have that connection. Um, and look, I mean, I live in a country where one of the, this is a beautiful country. It has tremendous swaths of beautiful landscape from deserts to forests and all of this. And one of the greatest things this country ever did was create the national park system.
Mm,
And that every Republican administration, it's under attack. The rivers aren't on fire anymore, but we're polluting them. And, um, we make a lot of stupid choices. But this inheritance is part of, this is part of our patrimony as a country. And, obviously, the rainforests are part of our, um, we're all interconnected and, the rainforests are part of our
mm,
patrimony as a species. And we have to figure out how to make it make sense to Brazil
yeah.
to stop
So
turning them into cow farms.
yeah, I think this message, as you said, it sort of comes through, but it comes through, like you say, on a local or a community level. Because you're right, there there's roof gardens, allotments, smaller sort of patches, window boxes, all those kinds of things where I think people have done those things. But you're right, there's like a this film seems to suggest, but well, governments will at least try and make an effort. And they did in the 70s, and over here they sort of supported the sort of the back to the land and the people that have been trying to be self-sufficient. But now you're right, even over here, we're like, we have great stretches of natural beauty, but there might be gas under it, so we want to dig it up. And you're like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of not the point. We should be moving away from that. Yeah, 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 yeah. But, and you're like, no, no, there's no but anymore. Like, you're right. We need to be responsible. And, I think there is a much more louder groundswell that needs to be reaching up to be saying, like, we, like you said, responsible for this. Because what the crap are we going to leave behind in another 50 years when someone comes back in 2072 and they're like, do you remember that there's a film, I've just found this film from 1972, Silent Running. They were really all about back to the land. Didn't last. Like, they really did turn it into a disaster. So yes, it could be predictive.
Well, and I want the next generation to be able to enjoy those places.
Mm,
Um, and as a resident of Hawaii, I mean, we're constantly fighting with how much do you favor development, and the economics of that. I mean, fortunately, we're not fracking, and there are
yeah.
no billboards, let alone
No.
fracking and oil and this kind of stuff. Instead, it's fights over geothermal and things like that. But
Yeah,
still,
we're
it's
not quite at the green level of destruction. We're still very much in that Victorian era of destruction. Like, if we could have coal mines, we bloody would, but no one would buy it.
yeah. Well, I mean, America's, the mainland is still there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, oil rigs right off the shore of some of those beautiful beaches in California, and you see these shots, and it's like, why are there three oil rigs? It like looks like a Corona ad, except there's three oil rigs out there, and you're like, who thought this was a good idea? But you could make $1 now,
hmm
and
hmm
so what? So your kids won't be able to enjoy it. Oh well.
Yeah. Anyway, we shall wrap up there.
Yeah.
We are going on an eco rant, which I think is fair in 2024. But Julie, any final thoughts then on Silent Running?
No, I mean, I think this is a good movie. I think this is one of the better movies, in my opinion. It's not that it's without fault. It obviously has these logical flaws. There are things that I'm watching it and I think, why is he doing this again?
Yeah.
Does this really make sense? But it's like some of those Star Trek episodes or Twilight Zone episodes where you think like its heart is in the right place. It's got a good message. It's trying to say something,
Mm.
which I still admire.
Mm.
We don't have a lot of movies that do that anymore. Um, I dig the little robots who apparently they were multiple amputees inside,
Yeah.
working those. Um, but they're very much kind of like the black hole level sort of like
Yes.
robots where they're kind of cute,
I
but
like
you
those
kind of have to
designs.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
like
so
that
I mean,
aesthetic. I'm good with that.
I dig it. I dig it. It obviously has its limits. Hey, it's got Joan Baez. What more do you want?
Yeah. There you go. Sold. Um, no, I'm not you. There's a lot to like in this film, and I can understand why it's become a film of import. Like people do, I've heard people refer to it, people talk about it. It's still very much liked. I can understand why. I still struggle with some of the points. I think, like you say, it's padded. There's some odd choices made in it, but I do think the messaging is good. I think Bruce Dern's very good in it. Actually, and I love the design work. I'm very much. This feels we've talked about what we would call it like industrial science fiction. We talked about Alien and Outland and those kinds of things. This has a similar sort of aesthetic to it, where it's not the garden, it's got that industrial sort of feel to it, and I really do like that aesthetic. Um, I like the fact it's like a science fiction film that opens with like a folk song, and those sort of those dichotomies and stuff. So all that's good, and it raises some good questions. It also represents an era to me where you can look at it and go, oh yeah, this feels a representation of those early 70s or even into the 70s. But it's still I still struggle to have that emotional connection with a lot of what happens, especially the second half of the film. And so it kind of disappoints on that level. So it's still good. And I see what you're saying. It's well thought out and it feels a lot more well thought out than some films we've done at different times. So I do appreciate it on that level. So yeah, no, it's a good one. But this is not the end of our churn into the apocalyptic. We've got on the main feed A Boy and His Dog next, which I did not realize, but is set in 2024.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I,
So
I haven't seen it since I was a kid.
yeah. So I was like, oh, that's very prescient. So let's see what they've predicted. Like watching Back to the Future 2 in 2015. What's that predicted? A Boy and His Dog. And we continue. But over on the Patreon, things are sort of hotting up. We will have, you will have, if you go over there, we've got a whole host of apocalyptic exclusives. We will have released The World, The Flesh, and the Devil. And as a follow-up to The Last Man on Earth and Amiga Man, we will have released I Am Legend. And there is much more to come on that as well. So, go check that out. For £5 a month, you will get all those on every 2 weeks. There's more exclusives and a whole host of other stuff over there. We've done Trekking Through the Twilight Zone, which I very much sort of think was I definitely got a Twilight film, Rod Serling sort of feel off Silent Running. 30-minute thoughts and a bunch of other stuff over there as well. So go check out the Patreon. Links down below. And yeah, I think
Well,
it's really reasonable for what we offer.
absolutely. And in addition to A Boy and His Dog being the next episode on the main feed here, we'll be doing Quatermass Conclusion and The Last Battle, from 79 and 83 on the Patreon. So, two more important apocalyptic movies for you on exclusive to the Patreon. So if you like what we're doing, there's
go check it
bonus
out.
stuff.
And if
Yeah.
you like that sort of 70s hippie, post-hippie vibe, you're gonna like Quatermass Conclusion. So yeah, we'll check that out. But anyway, for now, Julian, thank you very much. It's been another fantastic conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Scott.
And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And we shall see you on the next episode.